with some basic definitions, and I am talking out of the US context, and I will say right at the start that it makes me a little nervous to talk about this topic being here in Singapore, because I know I am at the crossroads of where there are this rich diversity of other systems of medicine, particularly traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, the traditional Indian system of medicine, and traditional Malay. Is that called Jamu? Is that the right way of saying that? Anyhow, I'm here in a number of traditions that, and one thing about alternative and complementary medicine, which is part of integrative medicine, is that Western medicine, to my way of thinking, biomedicine is really the interloper. It's the most recent, and although it has a lot of dominant forces in the world, there's many kind of competing systems of healing. And I know I'm in the midst of many of those. So if anybody who is here, and I know you said you were involved in studies with this out of the psychology department, if there's anybody who's actively involved with complementary and alternative medicine, either as a healer or as a user, I'm here for the next 2 weeks, and I would love to have a field visit to where some of these other kinds of practices are going on. So if anybody wants to take me under their wing, I would love that. Okay. So I would just say, in terms of my background, I worked 20 years at one of the major medical schools in Chicago, Illinois, and part of my work was to teach doctors communication skills, and the other day I talked about provider-patient communication. But as time went on, I'm still interested in physicians and healthcare providers and helping them to be better communicators. But my interests really migrated more to the experience of patients, or the word I like to use is health citizens, because we're not always patients. Patients, I think, require us to be in a system and working with a provider, but we're health citizens who care about our own health status and trying to stay healthy and so forth. And yeah, so a lot of my work has migrated more around patients and ordinary people and what they do for themselves in terms of helping their own health care. And I think that is in part how I became interested in integrative medicine, because at least in the US, but from what I've read here about Singapore as well, much of the practice of people either combining Western biomedicine with other practices or just going off and doing their own thing aside from Western medicine is really driven by people looking out after their own health care, not so much from a formal healthcare system. So, so with that, let me get into some basic definitions here. So integrative medicine, a couple weeks ago in my department, they were redoing the website and they were listing people's research concentrations and so forth, and I put something down about integrative medicine, and the person, the associate head in my department wrote back to me and said, can you use some other term other than integrative medicine? I don't understand what that is. And I answered her and I said, I really can't use another term because that's what it is. That's what I'm studying. But your question, you know, helps me to know that this has not, you know, kind of worked its way into the general population. So I thought I'd better start with the definition. So integrative medicine refers to the combination of conventional or allopathic biomedicine with healing modalities that are based on systems of beliefs and I think values as well that aren't typically included within biomedical practice. That for the last 2 decades or so we've been referring to as CAM, or complementary alternative medicine. And then in the US, the people, the professionals that are doing integrative medicine practice add that last line, and I think that's important, for which there is evidence of safety and evidence-based medicine. And why that is important, and it'll come up a couple times as I talk, is that that's linked with credibility. So practitioners that are wanting to be integrative practitioners and combine biomedicine with other forms of healing, at least in the US context, I won't say 100% of them, but many of them are concerned with there being evidence for what they're doing, that there is efficacy in what they're using.
So the last word should be efficacy?
I'm sorry?
The last word should be efficacy?
No, evidence.
Evidence?
Absolutely
Evidence of evidence?
Evidence of, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, I'm sorry. That should be, yes, I'm sorry, I'm blind to this, I didn't even see that, yeah. That it works, that we have proof that it works. Thank you, Jeff, for that. So in the early 1990s, the National Institutes of Health in the United States started a small office to look into complementary alternative forms of practice, and it's developed into one of the official centers within the National Institutes of Health. That said, it's the most recent one, and my guess is it's one of the most poorly funded ones. And frankly, I mean, I have no confirmation of this one way or the other, but I'm kind of afraid for this office in the current atmosphere of Washington with, you see what's happening with budgets there, that they could really get slashed.
But the amount of money available is very, very small.
It's very little. It's very little to begin with, but I'm afraid they could get lopped off altogether.
Is there an alternative or another sort of model in other healthcare systems in England or Australia or anywhere else, or is this unique?
I think there, I don't have an official answer for that, but I know when I've Googled, especially looking for sources of funding, which my colleague and I are doing, there are other offices that have come up, and I think they are in England and or Great Britain and Australia. But I don't know about those. The reason that when it was first started as an office and then continued to develop into a center, its main reason for existence is that they're kind of charged with coming up with the evidence that I was talking about before. So they fund research. Were you funded by them when you were there?
Yes.
Yeah. So they fund research to look into substances and modalities that are outside of regular medicine to see if they're actually having positive outcomes on health, right?
Oh, well, by the way, the Department of Defense and SBA may actually have more money available than Nike.
Oh, then I need to talk with you.
Okay.
I
mean, that shows the acceptance now because with the veterans, you know.
Okay, yes, I
They
do.
need something that works.
Exactly, exactly, and I am going to say something about that, but I didn't know that the Department of Defense was giving out grants. Okay, so, so that's where it, and they're not funding, this particular center is not funding a lot of like the social sciencey research that I'm involved with. It's more kind of clinical trials to see what works with health outcomes. So CAM, according to NCAM, is defined as a group of diverse medical and healthcare systems, practices, products that are not generally considered part of conventional medicine. So to break down that lingo just a little bit more, because CAM kind of mashes it all together, and it really is hard to have hard and fast distinctions, but complementary would denote something that is different from but harmonious with conventional medicine. And alternative, and see, I think, this is my little editorial comment, but I think what is complementary and what is alternative is somewhat kind of an attitudinal thing by the practitioner who's doing it. And so we have done studies with people who call themselves alternative because they don't want to be associated with conventional medicine. But I don't think it's inherent in the modality itself. Maybe it is, but I don't think so. I think it's kind of an attitudinal thing. But alternative denotes a departure from biomedicine and something that's done apart from. And so some other synonyms that you hear used, because the language is pretty fluid, is unconventional, non-traditional, unorthodox. And of course there is a huge irony in all of this, because many of the alternative modalities, we call them non-traditional, but they predate Western medicine by centuries. And then another term that is sometimes mixed in here is holistic healing, referring to the wholeness, wellness of mind, body, spirit. So whereas Western medicine kind of bifurcates or trifurcates these different elements, holistic healing treats them as a whole. The NCAM classification of what it is they study up to about a year ago was a lot messier and more complicated than this. They had things broken down, I think, into like 7 different clusters of things, and it was really confusing, plus they really overlapped a lot, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I was glad when I went back to the NCAM website that they kind of lumped their areas of interest in 2 main things, because at least this makes a little more sense, which is natural products, herbs, vitamins, minerals, probiotics, supplements that people take, most of which are not prescription kind of things. In the US, they're over-the-counter kind of buys. In the US, the most used product of this type is fish oil supplements. Is fish oil popular here in Singapore? Yeah?
Just fish.
Just fish. Well, fish is good too. You're getting your fish oil, but yeah. Okay. And then mind-body practices, which affect the interactions among brain, mind, body, behavior. I'm not sure how they're differentiating between brain and mind, but that's what their website says. Okay, to affect physical functioning and promote health. And then this is a whole clump of different kinds of things, from massage to yoga to mindfulness, meditation, Pilates, Qigong, a whole Reiki, a whole gamut of things. And And spinal manipulation, which I guess many different kinds of practitioners do, but that brings in the chiropractors in the U.S. And osteopaths to some degree, although osteopaths, I think, would want to count themselves as biomedicine. And many of these, I don't know that you could say all of these, but what unites many of these for me is that it has to do with movement of energy through the body and through a variety of means. Okay, so prevalence here in the United States, and this is from, I think, a 2009 survey that was funded by NCAM, and I haven't seen an update of it since this one. This one's still on their website. But at the time of the survey, 38% of American adults, 1 in 4, and 12% of kids, 1 in 9, were currently at that time of the survey using CAM, some form of complementary alternative medicine. But throughout a lifetime, 75% of American adults had used CAM at some point. And I saw, and I'm sure I just got a smattering of it, but as I was Googling, I saw that there's several kinds of research coming out of NUS that have to do with CAM. And there was a nice survey done by Dr. Lim and his associates in the department, or her, I don't know if it's a him or her, out of the Department of Community, Occupational, and Family Medicine here at NUS. And what they found in Singapore through a survey was, just trying to see what their total number was, but they didn't list that in the abstract, but 76% of the people surveyed had used CAM over a 12-month period, so a really high degree of usage. Females were 2 times more likely than males to use CAM, which that's true in the US as well. And it went across all of multiracial, multi-ethnic Singapore. But traditional Chinese medicine was the most widely used, followed by Jamu, traditional Malay medicine. But really different percentages. Traditional Chinese medicine was 88% reported as used. Traditional Malay, 8%. Traditional Indian Ayurvedic, 3%. And it had nothing to do with income, marital status, age, or education. Kind of across the board, there was very high usage here. And I found some other studies done with cancer patients, and to a lesser degree of prevalence with dermatology patients, but a high use of CAM here in Singapore. And one of the things that was noted throughout these studies, and definitely the same thing is true in the US, is that there was this very high usage, but people were not really sharing it with their doctors that they were doing this. And there was one other study that I found from NUS with, which was a 2005 survey of 500 and some medical students here at the university in terms of their awareness of CAM modalities. And it was pretty low in general among the medical students. The one that, I think like 57%, the one that most of the medical students were able to recognize was acupuncture. They knew about that, but any of the other practices was much lower in terms of their recognition. But at the same time, there was a good attitude among the medical students that they wanted to know more. And I would say the same thing is true with our medical students in the U.S. too. The two medical schools that I've been associated with at Texas A&M and Illinois, there's always some kinds of sessions about alternative and complementary forms of healing. And usually that's because the students have asked for those sessions, but they're optional. They're not a required part of the curriculum. So I think prevalence here in Singapore, not surprisingly, is greater, but some of the other trends that go with it are pretty similar to the US. Okay, now what I don't know really anything about is how health reimbursement works here in Singapore, and maybe we can talk about this toward the end of the session, but Americans, and again, this is really front and center in the news with the shutdown of the American government, because that is attached to the initiation of the Affordable Care Act, in which many more people would be covered by insurance. So the way things are now, people are insured mainly, if they're insured, they're mainly insured through their place of employment. Some people just pay for private insurance. People at the really lower rungs of the economic ladder get state aid, and then there's a great kind of lapse of people in between who are uninsured because their employment isn't covering them and their income isn't low enough to get state aid, and they're just kind of hanging out there uninsured. But even for Americans who have insurance and good insurance, most of the CAM modalities are not being covered by their regular insurance. Occasionally that happens, but in general not. So I'm kind of struck by this figure of 33.9, almost $34 billion being paid out of pocket by Americans because they want to use some form of CAM. And even though it's not being covered by their insurance, they'll pay for it anyhow out of pocket. Despite all that, we see an increase in how CAM is slowly, or not so slowly, being integrated into American medicine. It's not unusual to find forms of complementary alternative medicine available in U.S. hospitals and clinics. And 2/3 of HMOs. HMO stands for Health Maintenance Organizations, and that's one model of how medicine is practiced in the U.S. So health maintenance organizations are these big organizations or corporations that tie together practitioners, different kinds of practitioners, different kinds of medical services like x-rays and MRIs and laboratory testing and so forth, and a third-party payer or a form of insurance that through which people prepay ahead of time and then are able to access these services. So 2/3 of those offer some form of CAM, usually in the form of chiropractic or acupuncture. And then finally, there's this consortium of academic medical centers, and I think I left something out of the title. It's academic medical centers in integrative medicine in the US and Canada. And so this consortium was formed with the help of funding from the Bravewell Foundation to try and launch integrative medicine and really get a foothold in regular medicine in the US, and they're now up to 50 members. Most of those are at university-affiliated places, but not entirely. There's also been quite a few studies about complementary alternative medicine and how it links in with communication. And several of these studies point to a finding that one of the reasons that people gravitate toward either complementary or alternative services, either instead of their regular medicine or alongside their regular medicine, is they feel like the communication with providers is better, that there's more equal kinds of relationships with the CAM providers, that there's more genuine dialogue, that they can really tell their stories, say what's on their mind, and that they are more listened to. And there's several studies that point to these kinds of findings. So there's a strong link with communication. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of transition into the research that I've been working with, and I have to bring up my collaborator, Patricia Geis-Martin, who's at San Diego State, because we've done all of this work together. And so what I'm going to say is representative of our conjoint work and the several graduate students who have worked with us along the way. I think that really Patricia and I got started on this way back in 1996 or so, when we did a study tour in Cuba, and we visited the Institute of Complementary and Alternative Medicine there. And in Cuba, they use all kinds of modalities a lot because of the U.S. embargo, and they don't have access to a lot of things that we take for granted in biomedicine. So they have to look for other ways of doing their health care. And their Institute on Complementary Alternative Medicine was just fascinating. We saw a lot of great stuff there, and I think it really piqued our interest, and that was probably the beginning. So some of the previous research that I've worked on with Patricia and that Patricia's done on her own really focused on CAM practitioners and what they were doing in terms of their communication to get those great outcomes with their patients. And we've worked in the U.S., and then Patricia in particular has done this work in Costa Rica and Hawaii. Okay, so for the particular project that we're involved with now, and we've been working on this probably the last, at least for 5 years or so, is that we're trying to do a series of case studies of different integrative centers of medicine and healing to see how they work and to answer the question at the bottom. How is complementary alternative medicine in the U.S. moving from what was kind of marginalized socially into more mainstream medical context? What's the interface between biomedicine and CAM? And that was our original question, and I think that is still undergirding what we're doing, and we're using case studies to do that. Pictured on this slide is Dr. Andrew Weil, and I don't know if he is known in this part of the world, but in the U.S. he is probably well, in one sense, he's a popularizer of CAM. He's got this big white beard. He's a Harvard-educated physician, and he's often called in as kind of the guru whenever there are questions like on talk shows and things like that. They'll bring in Andrew Weil because he has like an encyclopedic kind of knowledge of health effects of CAM practices and substances and so forth. He's got, what you see here is the cover of one of his cookbooks. So he's got, you know, regular kind of reference books, he's got cookbooks, he's got a very active website. He's got all kinds of enterprises going, so he's a popularizer. But in addition to that, I think he's done something that's not as widely known by the general public, but more important. He is, although he's out and about a lot, I doubt that he's doing a whole lot of regular professorial things, but he is a professor of medicine at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. And some years ago, so he, in conjunction with the Bravewell Foundation, which I mentioned before, he started training in integrative medicine. So for practitioners, a lot of whom were nurses and physicians who were already trained in biomedicine, he ran a course and continues to run a course where people, initially they came to Arizona, and they still come to Arizona. That's kind of the focal point, but I think they can do it online now too, to train them to be integrative practitioners, to put these two bodies of knowledge together. And so the first several generations of physicians and other healthcare providers who are spread out around the United States who practice integrative medicine, not all of them, but the majority of them were trained in Dr. Weil's program. So it's been a very influential educational program. Now he's also begun a residency program. So after medical students graduate, they can come do a residency. But the training first was for people who were already out there doing practice who came to study with him, and that continues. So in that sense, he's done a pretty important service. In terms of popularizing integrative medicine in the U.S., a couple other people that I would want to acknowledge. First of all, that first line, CAM going into Kim. That I got, I heard for the first time when I was a visitor at the Integrative Medicine program at MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is a world-renowned cancer center in Houston. And Dr. Lorenzo Cohen, who I will quote later on, said they're trying to use this nomenclature of Kim rather than CAM. And the importance of that is the alternative part. They're kind of, well, alternative practitioners are wanting to do their thing apart from Western medicine anyhow, but complementary goes along with Western medicine. So they'd rather use the label of complementary / integrative medicine, and let the alternatives kind of go off by themselves wherever they want to. And again, I think this has to do a lot with legitimizing integrative medicine, that this is something that works together with and can work within a biomedical system. Many of the integrative medical centers acknowledge the influence of Dean Ornish, and he might be known here because he's a cardiologist and a research scientist, and in the early 90s published from randomized clinical trials that he did with his heart patients, and he put them on very strict healthy diets that were plant-based diets, low fat, combined with exercise and also combined with meditation and mindfulness practices. And he published that there were preventive effects, that people weren't having repeat heart attacks, for example, that went on his program. But I think the studies that more astonished people was that he had studies showing that he could reverse some of the impact of already having had a heart attack by staying on the kind of lifestyle program that he had set up. Now, it wasn't necessarily an easy program to stay on, but it had amazing effects. And so he's been an inspiration to a lot of people practicing integrative medicine now. And then this guy, Dr. Oz, he was introduced to the American public through Oprah Winfrey. And she thought he was this great doctor, and he became very popular, and he's spun off now into his own daily program that's very popular. Plus he's another person that gets called into talk shows all the time and referred to. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon by training, not unlike Andrew Weil, has books and all kinds of things going beside his TV show, but his TV show is very interesting because on a daily basis, it's a daytime show, probably geared to women who might be around and able to see it. He does something complimentary almost every day. And it's integrative because he integrates it within conventional medicine kind of advice, but he looks at several times he's done stuff with Ayurvedic medicine, and I'm sure with traditional Chinese medicine too, and he just exemplifies for the American public all these other kinds of practices that people can be integrating into their own healthcare. And he was just awarded by the Bravewell Foundation one of their major honors because I think he's doing a great job popularizing Kim for the public. Is there the equivalent here? Is there any doctors that are seen on the media?
Yes, I recently went to this talk by John Wong, and he's actually he's a molecular biologist. So he was part of New Water, so Singapore filtration system, all this cosmological testing things or something. But he had that life-changing experience where he was paralyzed, and then suddenly he wrote this amazing book about awakening your own healing power. And so now he does aromatherapy. He wrote a best-selling book.
I'll have to get the name of the book.
Yes,
Yeah. John Wall. W-A-L-L?
W-O-N-G.
Oh.
Wong. And he
Wong.
also
Okay.
has this Gaia Institute or something. Yes.
So yeah, when I was at MD Anderson and talking with Dr. Cohen and some of the other people that run their integrative medicine program, their greatest ambassadors to the other scientists and practitioners in this big tertiary care medical center are people that have either other doctors, conventional doctors who have gone ahead and referred their patients to integrative medicine, and their patients come back much improved, or where the doctors themselves, just like you just described with Dr. Wong, have had some serious illness and they have undergone one of the complementary treatments and have gotten better. And these then become the greatest ambassadors within the medical community. Okay, let me pick up some speed here. So these were the research questions that we started with. And this is mainly kind of an organizational study. I'm not an organizational communications scholar. Patricia is, but it's just the nature of what we were studying that we're really studying organizations. We picked centers. Somebody can be an integrative practitioner as a single person. My own doctor is an integrative practitioner. She was born in India, and she has fused integrative medicine and Chinese acupuncture and Western medicine, and she does that all within herself. And that's why I go to her. She's great. But we pick centers because they're more visible entities, and centers may have people like my doctor who within themselves are integrative, but also they employ teams of people with who have different specialties and work together. So we wanted to know how centers of integrative medicine function in terms of their development, their structure, and their practices. And then internally, how the integration of services and expertise occurs among the various people working at the center. And then externally, how each center has attempted to become institutionalized within whatever community they're in, which, like the one at MD Anderson, may be a community of conventional medical practitioners. So the first study that we did was kind of a comparative study, and the focus of it was to really unpack what the meaning of integration is. What does it really mean? I mean, we had the definition from NCAM, but on a functional everyday basis, what does it mean to be integrated? And so we picked 2 community-based integrative centers, one where I live in College Station, Texas, which is a very conservative kind of community. So when this new center opened and I began studying it about 6 months into its existence, called the Brazos Healing Center, that was kind of a big deal in my community because it was, there are a lot of alternative practitioners where I live, but to have a center for doing that was new. And then in San Diego, where Patricia lives, that's in California, there's more of those kinds of things around. But we picked community-based centers because they were easier for us to access and to get into. And we investigated those with in-depth interviews with the directors of those centers and several of their staff members. Plus, we went to the center and participated in a lot of the activities and classes and so forth that were offered by each center, and treatments, if you will. And also, during this same time, we were accepted as official visitors for a week, every day for a week at the Integrative Medicine program at MD Anderson, which, as I said, is it's part of the University of Texas. It's research-oriented tertiary care and really has a worldwide reputation in cancer care. And I was really curious, and I remain curious about this center, because they seem to be thriving, but it's taken them a long time to do that, and how they have managed to exist in such a conventional medical environment. So there were a lot of differences among the sites. As I said, we're in 3 different cities, and we deliberately noted variations in how each of these places was organized, the cultural context in which, the communities in which they existed, the stage of development that they were at. I had a brand new center, but Patricia's center in San Diego had been around for about 15 years, MD Anderson for about 20 years. The degree of interface with conventional medicine, the number of staff, and the kinds of modalities offered. And we looked at how they describe themselves in the literature, and particularly on their websites. So you can see there how they describe themselves. The one I worked with emphasized that it was an atmosphere for change, an organic unfolding, and they have a slogan which I love, which is "Shift Happens," a t-shirt that says "Shift Happens." Patricia Center, the emphasis was on prevention, education, and lifestyle management. And MD Anderson, in this heavy research environment, they're really big on saying that they are evidence-based, using evidence-based information to help patients and healthcare professionals decide how to best integrate CAM into their care. And what we got out of this study was that even though they were 3 different kinds of centers, there were certain common elements. That there was a key practitioner, and without that practitioner, I don't think these centers would have happened. There was somebody, or more, maybe more than somebody, who had a very broad vision of how regular treatments could work, the regular medicine could work along with holistic kind of thinking to offer a greater range of options for people in their health. Trailblazing was our term. We said in the article we published from this, we called it Trailblazing Healthcare, because it seemed a process of transforming what were accustomed meanings of health, illness, familiar patterns of organization to something else, that they were finding new avenues for doing this. There's a focus on the patient rather than the ailment. There is this wholeness of mind, body, spirit, and for at least 2 of these places, there was emphasis on evidence-based approaches and a strong motivation to find a variety of options for people coming to seek health care, to expand their options. We also borrowed this term, third space, a transcendence into the third space. The notion of a third space has been used in a lot of other disciplines, not so much in communication. We found it in urban planning, geography, education, but the meaning is kind of similar, which is a first space is the privileged dominant space. And so in this context, that would be biomedicine. The second space is the more marginalized kind of force, which would be CAM. But the third space, and that's what the integrative practitioners are trying to do, is to bring creativity to bridge the first and second spaces, to bring disparate elements into conversation, to find ways to transcend differences and to integrate them. And we found that a useful kind of concept. Internally, the meanings of integration had to do with teamwork, and that was essential. Having a shared vision, a shared vocabulary, theory, and research among team members. That was particularly the case at MD Anderson, and combined patient charting. And really, I think what we observed at MD Anderson was wonderful, but it was kind of an ideal that I think a lot of other places would have trouble reproducing. Every Friday, they have a large staff, but we sat in on the staff meeting, and it wasn't every staff member that could make that, but there was probably at least 20 people sitting around a table like this. And they had selected a couple patients with their pictures and their medical history to discuss. And all the practitioners from whatever modality they were using that have worked with that patient reported on what their work was and what the problems seemed to remain for the patients. And then there was like a giant brainstorming where everybody kind of, from whatever modality or way of thinking they worked from, kind of brainstormed to what else they could be doing to help this patient. And it was magnificent. But the problem is that it's not very transferable to other settings. The two other centers that we studied, trying to get staff together just for internal staff meetings, let alone to do patient care like what we saw in MD Anderson, was a lot of times impossible. People didn't necessarily work full-time at each of those centers, so they were part-time people. They had their own schedules with the clients or the patients they were working with, and there was just a lot of scheduling conflicts and incompatibility. And if they were part-time and they were making income at some other places, they weren't going to give that up to come to a staff meeting at this particular center. So trying to get that internal integration through teamwork is a challenge. Communicating integration externally with the centers in which each center is embedded, there were a variety of different ways in which they did that, and without going into the minute detail, we saw over and over again how they named themselves was important, because that's one of your big identifiers. Space is always an issue in terms of where you're located within the community, if you're located in a space that enables the different staff members to interface and is open to the community. Having an online presence, of course, is becoming more and more popular because that's how people find you. Establishing what your mission is going to be and the meaning of that for people outside the center, and doing community outreach. So the center that I worked with, where in the town where I live, was, I thought, particularly adept at doing that. They were present at every health fair and kind of community outing where they could have a table and explain who they were. They came to the medical school to do some of those optional sessions with medical students, and it explained some of these complementary modalities with the medical students. They were on the radio explaining themselves, and they just found a variety of ways to get out there in the community to make their presence and their identity known. So the challenges that we learned from this trailblazing study is that it takes novel ways of thinking to do integrative medicine, that there needs to be an accumulation, a continuing accumulation of evidence. Yes, there's efficacy, that's what I meant in that first slide. Designing new practice models that encourage team collaboration, referrals. Okay, and this will continue. Referrals tend to be self-initiated by patients. It's people getting themselves to these centers, much less coming from the conventional practitioners. There are some conventional practitioners making referrals, but not usually. Issues of legitimacy, which we've already talked about within biomedicine, establishing themselves as an organization, and then I've starred in the American context, negotiating new reimbursement categories, because that's going to be key. If I think I need to have acupuncture, am I going to have to pay out of pocket for it every time? Because that may limit my ability to do that. So the one we're working on now is a different kind of thing where we're centered on one healthcare system, and I'm not allowed to use the real name of it. So this is a pseudonym, but it is a large very large healthcare center located in the west coast of the U.S., a for-profit organization. There is a Center for Integrative Medicine there, and one of the reasons we picked this place is it's one of the best known. It's been in operation for over 20 years. I think it's the second oldest integrative medicine center in the U.S. People come to visit it because it has a great reputation. It's a really good center, and yet you will see that it is not being very well appreciated within its own healthcare center. So again, we're using in-depth interviews, some participant observation, more emphasis on the interviews, and examination of archives, that is the written materials that the center puts out about itself. Our data gathering is still in process. We finished stage 1, which is interviews with a lot of the center staff, both the physicians, but other experts that work there, practitioners. And we've moved into stage 2, and I think this is going to be really interesting. We've been referred by the director of the center to people outside the center who are both supporters and non-supporters of the center, and we want to find out what their thinking is about it. All the physicians and nurses at this integrative medical center have competencies both in a biomedical kind of way, but they also have a particular complementary modality that they've developed. Plus, there is a whole bunch of other people, psychologists, doing mindfulness training, and people teaching Tai Chi and Qigong, and who aren't doctors or nurses, but bring other kinds of expertise into the center. One thing that they did, which is kind of ingenious, is in order to help finance themselves, they've developed a system of, it's a heart risk evaluation, because there's a lot of cardiologists that are working as part of this center. They have kind of a specialty in that area. So they do this heart risk assessment, which is reimbursable through health insurance. It's very biotechnical and so forth. And the money they make from that goes to support some of the other things that aren't reimbursable through insurance. Not enough, but it's kept them going for a while. The biomedical assessments lead to referrals to other parts of the center for various complementary therapies, and they have a big fitness center, and they have all kinds of classes. You can, take cooking classes to learn how to cook healthy, heart healthy, and all kinds of things. Our preliminary findings, realizing we're still in the middle of this, is that 30% of the referrals to the center come from other physicians and clinics within the San Pedro system. So the rest of the patients that they see, the other 70%, are people that self-refer themselves, and they're either, the San Pedro system is an HMO system, so some of these patients have like membership in that HMO. Some of them are from outside San Pedro altogether, but it's a well-known center, so people find their way there. But what we're finding is it's not so easy to self-refer yourself. You have to go through an administrative, you have to go through a lot of red tape and administrative maze, and you have to be pretty assertive to get yourself in there. And we just had a kind of happenstantial example of that, where one of Patricia's colleagues was trying to get into this center because there had been cancer in the family, and they wanted the benefit of an integrative medical center, and so they were trying to self-refer themselves in. And they were members of this HMO, and they still had incredible problems getting in. And so we saw, you know, an up-close personal example of that. Okay. There's, throughout the whole San Pedro system, there is a standard patient evaluation form that everybody is mandatory to use. It's standard patient satisfaction. The results of this haven't been particularly helpful to this integrative medicine program. They tend to get inconsistent results, and the patient satisfaction form itself doesn't do anything to highlight the unique services that are offered through this center. So it's not a big surprise that they're not coming out particularly well on this. And one of the things that we're doing is kind of a side activity of this study is to try and help them develop their own patient satisfaction form that would be more appropriate to what they do. As I said, it's a big system that they're in. The system administration has been unsupportive. Pretty much there is pressure on clinicians to bring in more money, so that means more patients, longer working hours, and shorter time with patients. There is mandatory use of electronic medical records that people are struggling with, although I would say that's not just this center. That's happening all over the U.S. As electronic medical records are becoming more prevalent and required. What doctors are reporting is that it's not saving them any time. It means a whole lot more hours trying to fill in those electronic records. There's recently been a struggle, not within the center of her leadership, but there was a very well-known person who had founded the Integrative Medicine program, who has a nationwide reputation, has won all kinds of awards, and the system recently kicked that person out. We were coming in to do our study right when this happened. And I know there must be a whole backstory behind that, and we're trying to find out what the backstory is. So they lost probably their most visible representative of that center. They have very beautiful space that is located right beside the Pacific Ocean. As an integrated medical center, they have one of those labyrinths that you walk in a mindful kind of way outside, and there's a lawn where you can do Qigong and Tai Chi and all this. They have a beautiful setting, and it's a very contested setting, and they're in imminent danger of losing that space. They have the desire to demonstrate the patient outcomes from their integrative treatments because they know that they're helping patients to get better. However, there's no time allotted for gathering and analyzing that information. There is a certain irony in terms of staff reporting to us that the pressures are so great that they are losing their joyfulness in their work. And yet this is the same center that is teaching people mindfulness and meditation and all the ways of finding joy in your life, but the staff itself is being denied that. And possible issues with gender inequality. We're hearing from females within the center that things are not so great for them. Okay, let me finish up here. The future of integrative medicine in the U.S., just based on what we've learned so far, is that I expect to see continued growth coming from popular usage and acceptance. There's increasing incorporation of, I'm going to use that term, KIM, curricula in health professions education. Medical schools are getting more with this. There are proliferation of KIM clinical centers where people can access integrative treatments. But at the same time, the U.S. healthcare system is at a point where it's extremely pressured and in flux. And there's great uncertainty about healthcare insurance in general, let alone for integrative medicine. I think the most important thing about what Patricia and I are doing and what I feel should be kind of our lead in, we've been trying to find funding for our research, and there's not a whole lot of funding available for funding integrative medicine in general, let alone what we're doing. But the notion of dealing with stigma from conventional medicine, to me, is one of the most important things we could shed light on, and how to cope with that stigma. Of course, there needs to be ongoing research onto treatment efficacies, and I think it's too early to tell, but I think these choices could be there in the future, which is, will conventional medicine co-opt complementary integrative medicine for its own purposes? In other words, conventional medicine catches on that the public likes this, so we can establish a KIM center in our healthcare system because it'll bring in patients. That is, if it gets to be reimbursed. I could see that happening. Or will KIM transform biomedicine? And Dr. Cohen at MD Anderson is optimistic and thinks that this will happen, that the impact of complementary integrated medicine is that it will teach medicine in general the importance, the value of expanding treatment options, of humanizing clinical interactions, and having a focus on wellness and prevention. Oops, and let me just, and we'll go back. Well, I've lost the last quote here. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. There we go, thank you. I like this thought from Lorenzo, that we're not talking about a particular modality, acupuncture, yoga, whatever. It's a philosophy and an attitude toward what is health. And I think that is the important thing. So let me shut up and see what comments and questions you all might have.
I just have a curiosity question. In your research on the background of alternative and complementary integrative medicine, is there anything that shows why people report, like why Americans report seeking out different types of medicine? Like, is it because, like...
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that. There's dissatisfaction with conventional medicine, for one thing, and the feeling that conventional treatments, are oftentimes invasive, that they carry dangerous side effects, or just, and this is probably the biggest one, that people don't feel listened to, that they feel ignored. For some people, it's more like a general lifestyle kind of thing, like these integrative things fit more with the person I am. I like, natural organic things. I want to promote my health status, and that this is a philosophy that kind of fits more with who I think I am as a person. Now, in the US, unlike the Singapore study that I referenced before, it tends to be better educated, upper income kind of people, more women than men. So there is a demographic that goes on with that. And that's a fear that I have for this, that it just becomes kind of an option for upper class people rather than being infiltrated throughout the healthcare system. I think that's a danger.
I wonder, my guess is that alternative medicines is probably less of a class issue, and integrative medicine is probably more, it seems, because I was going to ask you that very question, in terms of ethnicity. I wonder if the growing diversity and ethnicity in the United States is pushing, the use of more, I would guess, alternative medicines. Maybe not integrative medicines, but I wonder if people coming from South America and Asia.
That's always been there, and on these, I don't know about this CAM survey that NCAM put out, because there's always been people practicing with their own herbs and folk healers, and these are not necessarily upper class people, but they bring these traditions with them.
I'm thinking the alternative, right? That alternative that doesn't integrate with biomedicine.
But as I said, I think that's an attitudinal thing. So that it could, if people thought their doctors might be open to that and would work with that, but since they don't, I'll just do it over here and do it independently, because I don't think my doctor wants to hear about this, and a lot of times doctors don't want to hear about it. So it's not the modality itself that's incompatible with medicine, it's the attitude that goes along with it. But you're right, so I think there are people at the lower income levels that use this because maybe it is more affordable, or it's what they know. And I don't know how they accounted for that in the CAM survey. I don't know that they did.
I was wondering, following that question, as you mentioned Singapore research, where even here, although people use it a lot more than US, but still they don't share, they get gone for this with the doctors. I thought it was very interesting that perhaps, when one is that they're afraid that the doctors might not like it, and I'm very interested in that could be the case even in Singapore, where there is the presence is a lot.
It is the case in Singapore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But they're afraid that the doctors might not take it in this right, thinking that they are going for alternative medicine, whereas here the
Yeah, I mean, when I was teaching in medical school and we were teaching interviewing skills, one of the, and particularly I worked for 10 years with the Department of Family Medicine, and one of the things that we tried to get the resident doctors to ask kind of in a standard way when they talked with patients is just to ask the question, what else are you doing for this problem? Just to kind of show an openness that I'm ready to hear. Whatever it is, whatever else you're doing, I would like to know about it. And that is not something that doctors ask.